Welcome to Highly Affected by Her Surroundings, the podcast where we reveal how your environment can make or break your day. Hosted by me, Nicole Roe, owner and lead designer at Arnix and Interiors. Hello, I am super excited for today's episode. Brittney Ellis and I have been talking about for probably months that we've been trying to get on the board. We both have busy schedules and a lot on our calendars, but today we made it work. So, Brittney, I'm going to give her a moment to tell who she is. But we have a very good mutual friend who was actually on, I believe, my second episode. So Allie introduced us. Now our kids are friends and go to school together and all of that. Brittney, take a few minutes and tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you again for Nicole for having me. I'm so glad that we figured this out. So I'm Brittany. I'm the CEO and creative director at Eventrics Weddings. I specialize mostly in South Asian or Indian weddings and celebrations. And so I bring those to life throughout the state of Florida. And then we do travel abroad and all sorts of fun locations with our clients.
Okay, so for people listening that don't quite understand what a South Asian wedding means, will you go into a little more detail?
So when I say South Asian, I mostly mean Hindu or Indian based functions. We also work with Sikh and Muslim clientele.
So for everyone listening, the visual here is multi-day, bold colors, beautiful florals. Brittany's like underselling herself 100%. So will you kind of explain what all goes into it, how and why there's multiple days and kind of some of the key factors?
Absolutely. So, most of the clients that we work with have traditionally, it's always changing, but they hire us for the first night is called a Sangeet night or Mendi, Garba, just depends on what location or state of India that family is from. And this is kind of just like a big music and dance night. And then the next day is followed by a ceremony and reception. So it's kind of like a mini marathon crammed into 2 days. But now what we've been noticing that's been more trending is more events are sort of being added on. So it's like now we're doing like pre-ceremonies leading up to the Sangeet. And then there's like, ceremonies that are also being incorporated. And now days are stretching from 2 to 3 or 4 just because, otherwise the bride's up for like 18 plus hours and it's just not enjoyable for everybody.
So how many people are normally at these weddings?
So on average, I would say that anything below 350 people is what we would consider intimate.
I feel like we just need a pause for anything below 350 people is considered intimate.
Yes.
I don't even know if I know 350 people.
Neither do I. And it's so funny because I feel like the guest counts sort of just grow and grow. And it's very much more parent driven in terms of where those guest count numbers are coming from.
It is wild,
Yeah.
but also I've seen the pictures. I had the honor about 10 years ago of attending a South Asian wedding, and it was a so the bride was in my sorority, and so they did the 2 days leading up, and then they had a traditional kind of American wedding. So we had days of events, dancing and, drinks and elephants and, like, it was literally all the things. So you're not just planning one wedding and maybe a rehearsal dinner, months of preparation.
Yeah, it literally is so funny because the other day I was trying to figure out how many hours go into each of our projects that we take on. And honestly, you stop after you get to like the 100th hour, you kind of just stop keeping track. But I would say on average, most of these events, quite frankly, take up to 150 hours to plan. That doesn't include the on-site management to then execute it day of. So it's a huge celebration for sure. And everyone I feel like that asks me about them is always very perplexed on how many days I'm away from my friends and family for these events. But I'm like, okay, well, usually I travel on a Thursday and then I get home like late on Sunday. It really just depends because, build outs and custom installations. I mean, all those things can take days prior to the event to even prepare for. So there's a lot that goes into it for sure.
The whole reason we initially had this conversation was the parallels between your weddings and my interiors.
Yeah.
We have a very similar clientele level. It is a luxury for both your brides and grooms and their families and our clients.
Mhm.
It's, a year prep of preparation, and when you say 100 hours, I feel like you guys are maybe at 100 plus hours because 'cause you're so efficient at it now,
Mhm.
but if someone was to do it from scratch, they would probably double that.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely think we've worked through the kinks at this point doing it for as long as we have.
But you have your A-list of vendors, you know who not to work with. Like, you have your steps and your processes, which is so similar to interiors.
Yeah.
But the wild thing is all this is leading up to one weekend.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're creating a moment that's kind of a semi-permanent, like live-in situation, whereas we're creating something that if something goes awry that day, like we ordered the wrong stage size, like that's it. There is no sending it back. It's you've got one shot to get it right. And it can be really nerve-wracking for sure.
And the clients are also like at an elevated level of nerves. They're, committed to a wedding, they're committed to seeing all these people. And I'm sure not all of them really want to see hundreds of people and shake hands and
Right.
do that for days on end, and then to have you be the one that almost takes the fall for anything and your team is a lot of pressure.
It is a lot of pressure, and I think you probably can relate to this for sure, Nicole. Is at the end of the day, you're trying to curate a space and create an environment for your client, and you want it to go off without a hitch. But we're the project managers, right? So anything that happens with a vendor or someone else that's bringing in a product, if it's not delivered to the expectation, the quality, we're definitely going to be the ones that receive that first phone call. And it's keeping everyone accountable and everyone elevated to show up and show out for your client.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning of this process. So they've reached out, they've done a discovery call, you guys have both agreed to work together on their wedding. Where do you start? I would imagine it's similar, or how does that go?
That's a great question. So for me, it's the not so pretty side of planning, I guess, or the not so fun side of planning. We'll spend a lot of time in intentional budget development conversations and phasing that out primarily before we even get into how we're going to lay out the overall look because the last thing I want is for any of my clients to fall in love with design concepts that number one are maybe not logistically feasible or possible within the space that they've chosen or just in general you're trying to make sure that you're spreading out also funds over the course of so many events and so many days. But when we do get to the fun part, absolutely, we are very intentional with creating more of like a mood board and understanding that we're all on the same page in terms of just the aesthetic that we want to bring to each function.
Just to give everybody, what is the average investment these brides and grooms families are paying for these events?
That is a great question. I would say that it all depends on the number of events and attendees coming, but average budgets these days are very different than they were even 3 years ago. I would say average budgets that we're traditionally seeing are starting probably at half a million up, would be at least a range that we're used to.
I mean, it makes sense. One single wedding with 100 guests
Yeah.
can be in the six figures easily.
It's like-
Then, keep adding more to that. And I look forward to you sharing your Instagram with everybody. But the florals,
Yeah.
I want to talk about florals. I'm jumping around, but
Okay.
the florals, like I've literally never seen more magical flowers at an event.
Yeah, I mean, florals are amazing. And I think that one thing is that, sometimes you have brides come to you and they say, hey, I want to make sure that I have peonies at my event, or they're very stem specific, is what we call it. But if peonies are not in season at the time that the event's taking place, the cost per stem can be very, very high, right? So you're talking about like $8 to $12 per stem for floral, but then you're needing like quite a few of them to like put a what we call a mandap, which is their essentially is their ceremony structure installation, right? The outdoor elements also will directly affect. We're here in the great state of Florida. And so, florals, and if they're hardy enough, are they going to hold up in the weather elements? If we're doing an overnight installation, I mean, all those things are a big factor. But I trust me, we have whole prep rooms where we have basically like a section of a ballroom completely blocked off with the AC turned all the way down low, just covered in flowers and prep teams for days working on these things.
I'm sure.
You know, a lot of clients are trying to be more intentful with the cost pertaining to the fresh products, such as the florals. And so sometimes you are able to repurpose them, but it really just depends on like the turnaround time, right? So if you have a ceremony that's starting at 10 a.m., but then you have cocktails starting at 6, and you're wanting to repurpose all the florals from your ceremony and your reception, there just may not physically be enough time to reuse them all. And sometimes they also didn't hold up well in the Florida heat. So by the time all of your guests have left, they've kind of wilted at that point. So it really is all very dependable on a lot of factors.
I mean, it makes sense. I'm like, they need to
I
last
know, trust me.
forever, like
It's so crazy because after like the pandemic, we used to like donate florals after the events were over to like the local hospitals and things like that. But yeah, we're seeing unfortunately, there's a lot of waste in our industry. That's for sure.
No, and I think it's interesting, and I think people are starting to be cautious of some of that, but I think the other thing we've seen now is people are really concerned about the guest experience. My clients are entertaining a ton now. People are coming to people's homes. They got used to not going to restaurants necessarily for dinners. I would love to know how you guys kind of walk through the guest experience. Like what conversations are had with the families? What are some unique things that you guys maybe do to keep the whole thing elevated and enjoyable?
Yeah, definitely. I love that. So, for us, I think the crossover a lot with probably interiors also is just spatial outlining, right? Like if you do have a client of yours that likes to entertain, like understanding essentially how many people approximately for each event you usually have, that's going to obviously spec out like the size, dining table or whatever, that's more your wheelhouse. But for our events, guest experience really touches into all the senses, right? So it really starts with, what am I hearing? Is the noise level too high, or is it an appropriate level that you can still have a conversation for talking? Or are we trying to ramp it up because we want it to be this epic party? And, things like, what are we essentially smelling in the room? Is it the fresh florals? What's the lighting look like? Was it very intentional? Sometimes when we work in spaces that have a lot of really great architecture to them, adding lighting can really enhance the overall guest experience because creating in a space with design is really setting the tone for a mood, right? And so I had a client of mine that brilliantly one time said, it's very important throughout the course of my weekend that we gauge the energy modulation of the guest. And I love that because ever since then, I've kind of really taken that into consideration because when you don't want to overload the senses at the welcome party, you want to sort of just layer in that luxury throughout the course of the weekend so that your attendees are going from experience to experience, quite frankly, experiencing something different in each of those spaces.
I just wrote down like all those words you just said because some of it really it makes sense. You can't be on a level 10 for 72 straight hours
Right.
because there also is a wide age range. You have the great-grandparents, you have little kids at a lot of these events, and, I mean, there's dancing, there's a lot happening that you do need those moments of calm,
Mhm.
but you said intentional lighting, and I'm picturing candles, but also a lot of these hotels and resorts, the lighting isn't great. They designed it decades ago. So what do you guys do to kind of impact that?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of times we don't use any in-house lighting. So we actually just ask the engineers to just cut all the lights that they essentially have. We usually are bringing in our own lighting. So our own lighting can be suspended from the ceiling direct, or it can be floor supported with trussing. But ultimately, lighting probably, if I would tell any client, and this would go for anybody with design, doesn't matter what your budget is, lighting should be a priority. And it really is almost start with that as your base once you have your understanding of your layout. Because if you go on Google right now and you look up what is a pin spot light and you look at the difference of having pin spot lighting as opposed to not having pin spot lighting at your wedding, there's a huge difference. It's like the table is lit up. It looks, more presentable. It brings your eye level up. You're not looking at the crazy carpet down below. So lighting plays a big role, I think, in just the guest experience. Did we nail the design? Did we enhance the property or enhance the design features that we brought in to really bring it to life?
I think we've all been at an event where they go to do the live auction or they do something and they crank the lights up. And I'm like, none of us look good.
Absolutely.
And in weddings, there's photos. Everybody wants to look flattering. And when we're designing spaces as well, you want the wall sconces, you want the table lamps. You don't want to have the down lighting or heaven forbid up lighting of some of these places because you look old, wrinkly, sick, all the not flattering descriptions, but it's
Yeah.
so
It's
true.
I mean, literally at my own home, I have like dimmers on everything because I'm like real like I'm a mood person, right? So it's like if the sun's down, I don't want the lighting all the way up on high. I want like the house to feel like dimmer and warmer. And it's the same thing as an event. You might want when guests initially go into that ballroom to feel like that ambiance and that. But when the dinner service is served, you might want to bring things down a little bit of a notch. People are having more table conversation. And then when the dance floor gets going, maybe on the room takes on like a whole different color, a whole different tone and vibe. So all those things translate for sure. And definitely back to taking pictures, you want your attendees or anyone that's in your space to be wanting to post those photos and share them with pride. You're not wanting to be like, oh my God, every time we go over to so and so's house, my pictures look terrible. So I'm not going to ever post those.
Yes, yes, yes. This is so true. And also, I'm curious for us, the technology of battery operated lights and the rechargeable lights for tables and buffets and outdoors has improved so much in just the past 18 months.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's got to be something for y'all as well to be able to have all these options that actually work.
Yeah, absolutely. It was so funny because I think that, and I only first saw this when it was like an Amazon ad or something. It was like the tabletop light for the outside. And I was like, wow, this is actually incredible. There's literally no excuse to not have lighting on like every high top table or every outdoor table. It was just so because we're used to just like suspending things or bringing in chandeliers or different things like that. So yeah, the battery operated lights have actually they have a lot of very sleek looking ones that work out really well.
I'm getting to the age where I occasionally have to pull out my phone and use the flashlight, to read the menu.
Right.
But when they have those lights, you can kind of casually shift it over and, read the stuff. But it's the same at these events. They want to see what they're eating, they want to see what they're reading and not have to pull out a flashlight to do that.
Right. Absolutely. Because that really just speaks to also just luxury, right? Luxury is felt, it's ease, right? It's just comfort, it's feeling at home in a space. And I think that having intentional details like that keeps guests comfort in mind because it's one thing to be design focused and want to create a space that's unique, but if it's not translating to just being easy to be in, then I think that is not necessarily a great translation of what you were probably trying to achieve in the first place.
I don't know how every, charity and event committee in the county hasn't, begged you to, join. I'm sure there's gonna be some after this, but I think lighting is great, the sound.
Yeah.
I know there's speakers and whatnot, but like you said, it's hard to hear people. It's hard to, have the conversation, but also there has to be background music. There has to be, that sets the tone.
Yeah, it's challenging sometimes because I always feel like everybody's comfort level surrounding the noise octave is going to be different. So I always just encourage the clients that I'm working with just sit your elderly guest purposefully away from where the speakers will be placed because they tend to be the first one that raises their hand and says, "Hey, the octave is a little too high." And you've got the couples that are like, they've flown in this DJ from New York. They want to party that night. And so they're not trying to turn the noise down. And so you're trying to balance everybody's wish list, but trying to be intentional with seating, I think is important too, for sure.
That is super smart. I know I've gotten stuck by the speakers before and been like, I can't do this.
Absolutely.
Or
We all have for sure. And you're like, I can't actually have a conversation with you because you can't hear anything they're saying. They can't hear anything you're saying. I get it.
we went to a silent disco once for a friend's birthday, and I was like, "I never have loved something more." When we wanted to talk, you took off the headphones and everybody could hear
Yeah.
themselves. I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I'm aging myself so dramatically right now."
I love that. And I've never been to a silent disco, but that's definitely on my bucket list.
You could talk one of their
Walk into.
events into being.
Yes, I totally could.
Okay, so now let's go back to, maybe 1 or 2 just, wow moments
Yeah.
in some weddings you've planned. Like, what were the things that were just like, A, I can't believe we actually pulled this off, and B, everybody was just blown away by?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been so many of them, but I would say some that maybe are meaningful or were really special for me when I started planning them. Of course, you can't talk about Indian weddings and not talk about elephants. Elephants are very expensive to bring in. And, elephants are also, there's a lot of, as there should be, there's a lot of animal rights to protect elephants too. So if they're going to be involved in a function, there's a lot of red tape. But when you bring in an elephant for an event, it's like one thing to hear it like, oh, they had an elephant, but it's another to like be a part of that process of like having the elephant literally arrive on a semi trailer. You're like hosing the elephant down. You're like getting him ready for the barat, which is essentially the groom's procession to the ceremony. And it really is just such a really cool and fun moment because they're such gentle giants and it's a live animal, right? So I think it's just an interesting thing because they're not following like your timeline. They're going to walk at their pace. I had elephants before rip up landscaping. Like here we are at the Waldorf, and it's like, I'm hungry now. So it just decides to rip up like full bushes. Like it's not like, so it's like slinging like landscape around, and you're just, I mean, you're just, what are you doing? You're walking, and the elephant's just going to do whatever it wants to do. Right. And so those are just some fun memories and moments because where else are you going to do that in your job, I guess? Just fun, different, for sure. I think other moments for me are probably more design oriented, just in terms of pulling things off that I was like, didn't even know that we could pull off. One was we took a pretty large section of a ballroom. And, when you go into ballrooms these days, you probably have like, I don't know, between like, let's just say 4 to 6 pre installed chandeliers in the ballroom space. Well, we decided that we wanted to basically create our own chandelier. We wanted to have the whole ceiling as one big chandelier treatment to have this really wow and impactful moment so that when guests walked in, it just felt like our own custom chandelier we suspended from the ceiling for this event. And so we have done those types of installations that took multi days of rigging because you have to actually like rig each of these points into the ceiling, but it was incredible. It really just, you push the envelope of what you think essentially can be done, and you tend to ask yourself, well, why not, as opposed to, oh, that's not something we can do. And when you have a client that has a vision and they really want to make it happen, we always say, if it's legal and ethical, let's give it a go. That's been some really cool moments. We've done so many of them, but I would say also we've brought in a lot of custom chandeliers. A lot of our clients don't particularly like the lighting in ballroom spaces, so we tend to bring in our own.
I think that is so interesting, but what's also interesting is many of the guests have attended so many weddings.
Yeah.
They have large families, big social groups, especially when the parents are inviting their friends. So there is this sense of we don't want to copy what the last 5 weddings we've been to look like, but also how can we do something different but still stay within tradition and be classy or whatever the goal is. So, I mean, they're not ordering from the basic, like,
Right.
kind of wedding spec book of, this is the linens, this is the silverware.
Oh, absolutely. I think the one thing about any luxury client, whether it be for interior design or events, is that I think the one thing that our clients are not willing to tolerate is anything that feels cookie cutter. It's just a hard stop for them. And so everything from the lighting to the kind of cutlery that they select to the patina, like all of it really matters and it's all very intentional and elevated. But you're right. I mean, the one thing that's very interesting, especially for the Indian clients, is similar to probably your style clientele. They're very well traveled. They attend a lot of social functions. And my clients in particular, probably on average, they attend probably 8 weddings a year minimum because they have so many friends and family. I had to talk to a bride the other day. She was heading to Spain for a wedding. And then she was like, oh, and then the weekend after that, we're heading to California. They're not just having immersive experiences in the state of Florida, where it's just obviously where we reside, but they're having them all over globally. And so the expectation of carrying that to their function is really, really high for sure. You've got to create something that is a memory that people are talking about at brunch the next day, right? Because if you don't have brunch conversations and they're not talking about that, then you didn't hit the mark.
8 weddings a year, like, I couldn't even I mean, I know you do that for work, but, like, if I got invited to 8 weddings, I think we're invited to a few graduation parties, and my, like, social anxiety is already like, I don't know if I can do all of that.
Yeah, I literally don't even remember the last time I went to a wedding, like of my friend's wedding. And I think that's just maybe just westernized society, we just don't have a lot of those. We have like a wedding or a baby shower or something like that. But, our obviously our clientele tends to, maybe it's not a wedding, but a charity event or other social gatherings and things to that end for sure. All influence their design and their aesthetic.
It makes sense. I think one of the other things we've noticed is personal branding.
Mhm.
So they have, their image on social media. I'm sure most of your people are very successful. So they are founders of companies or whatever their industry is.
Right.
They drive specific cars because they have that personal image. They have people that dress them. Have people come to you and been like, "This is my personal brand. We now need to kind of turn it into a wedding," because 'Cause we're getting that with people's homes. Like, they want people to walk in and be like, "This is you." Like, "This is you," and not just, "Oh, you like the color green," but like,
Yeah.
"This is your vibe. This is how you live."
I actually love that your clientele is maybe incorporating that into their homes. That actually makes a lot of sense for sure, because why would you not? I'm getting couples to say their personal brand as much as they are coming to me, and they're a lot more intentful with what their expectations are that they want the guest experience to be than they were 3 years ago. But it was sort of just, we took on a very, I don't know how to say this. We took on a very almost like traditional approach to a lot of these functions. We know that the Sangeet night's going to be like music and dance. So we need like a stage backdrop, and we need an area for bride and groom to sit, and we need an elevated dance floor moment. And the rest of it's just going to be mix and mingle seating. Whereas now you see guests or clients, excuse me, are going to these functions and they're saying, hey, maybe we're not going to really do a music or dance moment. Maybe we're going to now just do a meet and greet with a couple and just have like an arrival experience. Everything from custom curated check-in desks that have maybe not branded, but like branded swag for the guests to wear over the course of the weekend, which is so cute. So they'll have like branded hoodies for the after party, or like a branded little water tumbler that they're going to fill out so that anybody who's at the pool, they can see like that color, and like they know they're a part of their event. So we're seeing a lot of like branded swag on arrival to be part of like implementing into their weekend, which is really fun.
I think that's neat because it's not gonna be cheesy, but how fun to, like, go down to the pool and
Yeah.
see continue on with it if it is something, quality and worth the time.
For sure, because just like, when you're designing a home, you're probably also selecting pieces that are conversational pieces. So it's almost like the wedding's way of doing that, maybe by early on connecting the people that are going to be spending the next 48 hours together of, oh, hey, you're for here for so and so's wedding as well. The couple is intentionally putting these moments together so that they can bring their people together, so that they actually are having conversations outside of just the scheduled events. They want, by the time the reception happens, that they're dancing together and having a good time together because they've gotten to know each other over the course of the weekend.
And it becomes I mean, networking is very business driven, but I think relationships that are formed at those events, you obviously have common ground.
Yeah.
The bride and groom's families like you,
Mhm.
so most likely, you're a good human that all has things that everybody else can enjoy. So why not kinda continue that on? How fun.
Yeah, I think it's really great, honestly. I feel like being more intentional and thought driven with weddings, because you're like, of course, we're there to witness the union, but it's so much more than that, right? And I think taking your guest attendees' thoughts of, they've spent money to be there, they've gotten on a flight, they've taken off work, and really taking them into consideration to create that thoughtful environment goes a really long way.
Okay, some kind of, I wanna say quicker questions, but, like, color palettes. What are some of the most popular color palettes y'all have been doing lately?
I'm seeing a lot of monochromatic right now, like a lot of
Okay.
green on green, blue on blue, red on red. I'm seeing a lot of just really vibrant colors, but an ombre effect of those being brought into spaces.
So low contrast.
Mhm.
I like that, and I think
Yeah.
also when there's a ton going on, low contrast visuals make sense. If everything was black, white, yellow, navy, it's not easy to feel settled.
It's really difficult. We had a client this past weekend, and I think she pulled it off beautifully with the designer. When you walked in, they had this huge round focal bar moment with this life-size tree. We're in a 25-foot ceiling ballroom. So then guests would make their way around that bar moment. The whole room was wrapped in this sapphire blue color. We had this intentional stage backdrop where the DJ was elevated over the dance floor and everything else was low laying florals and candles, but it felt intimate for such a big crowd. And that's essentially what we were trying to achieve was like a quaint dinner party, but for like 400 people.
Quaint and 400. Here we go again. Okay, food trends. What are the types of food? I'm sure there's some traditional dishes, but even then, like, what are people, like, gravitating towards?
Totally. So I definitely feel like, especially with multicultural events, people would probably get burnt out on just having Indian food at every single occasion, right? Indian food's also very heavy. So you
Yes.
kind of want to take a nap after you eat it. A lot of our clients have been doing more food stations, bringing in different cuisines and culture to actually be fused throughout. Mediterranean is making a hot comeback, and I'm a big Mediterranean foodie. So I'm loving that. I've been noticing a lot of that at events lately.
Which makes sense because Mediterranean in general is light and fresh and can keep you kind of going instead of having something that's heavy and makes you wanna take a nap.
Yes, absolutely. And also I'm seeing a comeback, which I really love. It's so funny because I have these clients who spend, all this time and energy effort, but then it's like when it's time to have the late night, we call it the drunk food, and they're trying to order from Uber Eats for like 50 people who are left in the ballroom. I'm like, please stop. We cannot rely on Uber Eats at midnight for 50 people. So we've been partnering with our properties to put out some like really fun like late night bites and things like that that just you would be looking for after, you've been partying for 6 hours. Like pizza or a slider station or like I've seen french fry bars, like all that sort of fun stuff for sure.
There is nothing more that I would want than french fries as I'm headed back to my room. Give me something a little salty.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, I've seen when we've even gone to, like, local charity events where there's, like, donuts or cookies and milk or, something as you're on your way out
Oh,
to fill your
absolutely.
stomach.
We did do a charitable event one time where everybody got back in their car and they had like pre-wrapped little Oreos and water bottles in their car ready to go at valet. It was just like, take it and go. It was already in the car. Such a great experience because can you imagine, even if you don't like Oreos, it's fine. You can bring it home to your kids or whatever you want to do. But just the thought that you have something to go home with, it's like that extra hospitality for any event. I think that translates a lot. That's essentially the environment you're trying to create is just hospitality for people.
I have never thought of the valet it's a
Yeah,
cold water bottle,
yeah.
but to have little snacks placed in your car,
Oh, yeah.
that is
I
genius.
love it's the best thing ever. Little things like that just go a really long way. We've been doing this thing called hospitality rooms, and it's kind of been a trend for a while with Indian weddings. Because they have so many events lined up, we create these high tea moments in between functions. So they can come to a hospitality room, grab a cup of chai or coffee, have a little high tea moment, grab a little snack or refresher in between events. And it kind of becomes almost like that card room, right? A spot that everyone can gather and hang out in between functions.
I think I would stay there the whole time. Okay, so tell me more about this. So this is just everyone is invited to it, or this is just the wedding party or the
It's just a
families?
24-hour kinda open room. So whenever anybody checks in for a wedding, they get a schedule of events with their welcome bags, and it outlines, "Here's the events that we're hosting, but anytime that you wanna drop in and grab a cup of coffee, this is our hospitality room." And so anybody can just go there. We've done it actually where we had, like, the dads were really big on having cigars and, like, cards for their friends because they wanted to get away from the late night crowd. So we had like a cigar roller. We've had like our own separate little scotch bar in there for the guys. We've had like little card rooms, but usually it's just like a little spot that you can just go anytime, grab a little snack, grab a coffee. Because for the South Asian culture, it's all about hospitality. They want them to go to this curated room that they can come and grab something and not have to pay for it.
And I love the idea of having those moments to have conversations with people you may not talk to when, the music is high or there's something being structured,
Yeah.
but to be able to sit in there and talk to somebody's aunt or somebody's grandmother or, just a friend
Yeah.
or even, I mean, to play cards. I know it's a man thing, but like to go in there and have something like that,
Mhm.
a hospitality room is genius.
I think it's just a catch-all, right? Because sometimes you don't wanna go down to breakfast, you're not that hungry or but just having a intentional space that, again, it's all about trying to form these early connections because by the time the party arrives, you want people to actually have had an opportunity to get to know each other.
And to not be unaware of what's happening.
Yeah.
Okay, so hospitality room is brilliant.
Yeah.
I feel like every event that I ever go to in the future needs to have this,
Yes. A
to have
little
a
breakout
spot
room. Yes.
to jump in between things. Okay, so we've talked elephants, we've talked lighting, we've talked colors and food and hospitality rooms. What other little just kind of nuggets of, like, magic are you guys kind of aware of?
I definitely think that the only other thing I would say for magic is always pick the vendors that you feel are in alignment with the caliber of event that you're looking to host. And you kind of know that, having that relationship to be able to say, hey, like, let us interview this person. We're going to kind of come back to you with the pros and cons. This is always going to be your decision, but like, let us dig in and do our due diligence to make sure this is going to be like a good fit, because you'd rather have that moment to like share up front. So I think clients are getting a little bit more also intentional with vendor hires. Do they just resonate overall on all pages, right? Because having someone that doesn't bring their A game on site for an event can infect the whole experience. That's for sure.
We've had similar where the client's like, "Oh, I have a great painter that we like to use or a tile installer."
Right.
And we realize they may be good humans and they probably do very good at more of that builder grade house or that mass produced where it's just subway tile. But when we're installing your $100 square foot marble mosaic, it needs to be the best of the best.
Yeah.
And that's a conversation that can sometimes be hard, but same with you. I'd rather have it before than be like, "Hey, by the way, you're a really good guy.
Yeah.
We have to tear it up." Or for you, if it's one of the food stations, like he just didn't execute or whatever the case may be. So I think vendor relationships need to be trusted.
Yeah, it's very important. And I think that's one thing that we really stand behind. We're very particular about who we recommend for an occasion, because we've definitely have had some horror stories. Everyone in any industry has their horror stories, but they're also the learning curves that you now know. We're going to have the hard conversation if I feel like someone just isn't ready. We've absolutely had to fire vendors in the middle of planning process that were just like, we got to part ways because we're just not seeing eye to eye, or we're just not in alignment with what the caliber of audio equipment or whatever it is that's needed for this occasion. And you'd rather be the bad guy in that moment as opposed to have the delivery just not be what your clients expect.
Okay, so going off of that, have you ever had to say like hard no to a client when they've requested something? Maybe it's you've had a bad experience in the past, or what they're wanting is just so outlandish, or like you said, not ethical, or, not sustainable, or whatever it is. Like I'm picturing anything that's ever been like, we no.
It's so funny. I recently heard somebody say, and we've been trying to take this approach as well. We always say, listen, it's not that the ideas are bad, it's just that they may not be cohesive with the overall vibe that we're trying to bring for this function. So we always say that after parties are for the bad ideas. Take all of your bad ideas and throw them in the after party. And that was what I heard from one planner say that one time. And I was like, that's brilliant. You absolutely should do that, because if you want this like crazy signature drink, but you don't really know if everyone's tequila drinkers, like just throw it in the after party. Or if you're like, hey, I really want this. I've had families that are like, oh, we love this restaurant and their food is fantastic. I'm like, listen, we can love a restaurant all day, but can they cater for a multi-day occasion for like 500 of your nearest and dearest? I don't think that we should be the guinea pigs for this one.
But I think the after party, I need to figure out what the design equivalent of the after party is or
Like the
something
powder
else, but
room.
an idea
Yeah.
for the after party. I
Yes.
think okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great kind of ending point. I would love for you to tell everybody kind of where they can find you, website, social media. You have your own podcast, so I think that's definitely worth shouting out. We'll make sure to share some of the great pictures in the show notes. Literally, I bow down to what you and your team do and what you accomplish. It is just so beautiful and magical, and it really is at a whole different level.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole. I so appreciate that. I also am in awe by what you do, because I may design events, but I definitely could not be one that would design my own space. So there's a whole different layer to designing an event that's like a permanent installation for the most part, as opposed to a one-time shot. I host a podcast called Beyond Vows and Veils. Anyone is welcome to look that up. We're on Spotify, Apple, all the things. And also our Instagram is EventricsW. And then our website is eventricsweddings.com. So definitely feel free to check that out.
And I highly recommend following her on social. It is just stunning and it's so well executed.
Appreciate you.
Well, this was so fun. I know we'll be seeing each other in the next couple weeks, but thank you. And I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Highly Affected by Her Surroundings. I truly appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you have a moment, please rate and review the podcast. It helps others discover the show, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. For more behind-the-scenes content and design inspiration, follow us on social media. You can find me, Nicole, at Nixon Interiors, and the podcast at Highly Affected by Her Surrounding. We'll be sharing updates, sneak peeks, and exclusive offers you won't want to miss. Plus, if you want a recap or more details from today's episode, you can find the show notes at arnixoninteriors.com under the Highly Affected by Her Surroundings tab. Once again, thank you for your support, and I can't wait to connect with you on social. See you next time.